Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Will. Something about me is I don't like constantly consuming new media. I just like rewatching the same media over and over and over again. I have a few specific shows and movies that I really love and just constantly want to rewatch over and over and over again, and it's rare when I find new media that I love as much as the old media. And when I do find new media, usually it's something that has some form of connection to the old media, whether it be like a really similar storyline or a remake of something else. That's just how my brain works. I don't really like finding new things, and I wish that the same shows would just continue forever and ever and ever, because when my shows end, I literally spiral. To start off 2023, I was very excited. The universe blessed us by releasing a movie musical of the story Matilda to Netflix, giving me something new but also kind of old to fixate on once again. I really fell in love with the story of Matilda through the 1996 movie version when I was a child, and I would just watch it over and over and over again. I first actually read the book after I watched the movie, and I first read the book when I was about 10 or so, and I would say it was probably about 2017 when I discovered that there was a Broadway musical of my favorite story, and of course I really enjoyed that too. I already had related to the story of Matilda a lot, but being able to just hear it through songs gave the story a new type of meaning to me. Naughty has definitely been in the back of my mind ever since anybody has pissed me off since I first heard it, and I kind of just love the idea of a little British girl telling me sometimes you have to be a little bit naughty. I will say, for the record, I believe in the UK, Matilda is still in the cinemas and won't be released until the UK Netflix until this summer, but it was released to Netflix on December 25th of 2022 for people in the US, and I absolutely loved the movie musical adaptation. And it was something right off the bat going into it I knew I was just going to love. Matilda is a very important story for a lot of people, particularly people who have struggled with being ostracized by different people and being ridiculed because they're different. And of course for people who struggle to have love or acceptance from a parental figure. Many people dreamed of being rescued by a loving adult figure like Miss Honey, and Embeth David's portrayal of Miss Honey paved the way for cottagecore lesbians everywhere. Today I wanted to talk about how truly monumental the story of Matilda really is, and just how impactful it has been for many people, as well as just sort of give my opinion on the new movie musical. The story of Matilda was first published in 1998 by Roald Dahl and was turned into a movie 8 years later in 1996, which of course is the iconic movie starring Mara Wilson and Danny DeVito. The musical was first brought to the stage in 2010 at the Stratford-upon-Avon Theatre in England, where 3 actresses alternated as the role of Matilda, and Lauren Ward and Bertie Carvel got their start portraying Miss Honey and Miss Trunchbull. In 2011, the musical received its West End debut. And in 2013, the musical hit Broadway, which is the stage version I'm going to be focusing on for this video. Lauren Ward and Bertie Carvel reprised their roles as Miss Trunchbull and Miss Honey, and 4 girls alternated between the role of Matilda. There was also a US national tour and other locations, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to stop there at the Broadway version. Point being, Matilda has been impactful for a lot of people for many years, and it didn't stop with the 1996 movie version, and it definitely didn't stop with the 1988 book version. I honestly really love the way that they took the Broadway musical and put it on the screen into a movie. I think that the cast that they chose was absolutely phenomenal. I'd probably rate the movie musical version a solid 8 out of 10. There were a few things I was a little disappointed with, and obviously you can't have everything the exact same when you go from a stage to a big screen, but all in all, I really enjoyed it. In my personal opinion, I was a little bit disappointed with some of the stuff that they ended up cutting out. The opening song from the musical, Miracle, was shortened a lot, which I expected, and the songs Pathetic by Miss Honey, Loud by Mrs. Wormwood, and This Little Girl by Miss Honey, as well as Mrs. Wormwood's solo part in the opening song, Miracle. She originally sang about her thoughts regarding giving birth to Matilda, which weren't pleasant thoughts. She was basically saying how instead of giving birth under this foul fluorescent light, she was supposed to be dancing the tarantella at a salsa dancing competition that night. and she made it very clear that she was not happy about having a daughter. I was kind of disappointed that that part was cut, because to me it really showcased just how much Mrs. Wormwood and Mr. Wormwood did not want Matilda. It included a little bit of them singing about how they didn't want her, but it wasn't as emphasized as I feel like it should have been. It mainly showcased, in my opinion, that Mr. Wormwood didn't want a daughter, and it made it seem like he was excited at the thought of potentially having a son, but it didn't really capture the fact that they just didn't want a child, period. At least in my opinion. I was also kind of disappointed by the cut of the song Loud, because once again it really showcased just how little Mrs. Wormwood cared about her daughter. Loud was a song that took place in a scene that occurred in the book and the 1996 movie where Miss Honey went to Matilda's house to talk to her parents about Matilda's talent, and Mrs. Wormwood was sort of explaining how she didn't care about Matilda's schooling or anything really about her. Loud sort of captured how Mrs. Wormwood was really more focused on looks and things of that nature rather than brains. And it really was disappointing that we didn't get to see that played out, because I thought that that would have been absolutely iconic to see in a movie.
A little less dressing like your mum, a little more ba-dum-bum-bum, ba-dum-bum.
They also took down the part of Matilda's father a little bit more, and it was still heavily implied that he was a crook and he wasn't a good person, and they showcased that he wasn't a good person, but I feel like a lot of his personality was lost when it transferred over from the stage to a movie musical, and I feel like there wasn't really any layers to the characters whatsoever, and in a way they were a little comically bad and not as entertaining as I feel like it was on Broadway. The character of Michael, the Wormwood's actual son, was also cut from the movie version, but I don't think that this movie suffered a tremendous loss from the lack of Michael, because I don't necessarily think he would have transferred as well from the stage to the movie from the way he was portrayed in the Broadway version. However, his character did serve to showcase that there was a child they weren't as disappointed in as Matilda, and it showcased that they did have a son, but all in all, I didn't think that the cut of Michael was too severe, and I don't think it really impacted the movie too much. However, I do think that Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood looked exactly as I would have imagined them to. I loved the costuming for Mrs. Wormwood, and her outfits were definitely very loud and very bold, and exactly what I would expect from her. I was also kind of upset about the cut of Miss Honey's song Pathetic, because it really embodied just how terrified she was of the Trunchbull. However, Lashana Lynch's rendition of My House was absolutely perfect and everything I would have wanted it to be. And a new song was added to the end of the movie called Still Holding My Hand, and that was absolutely amazing as well, so it made the loss of Pathetic a little more bearable. The other flaw I had with this movie was Bruce Bogtrotter. Had him in some kind of fat suit, which to me just looked off for the whole movie, and it kind of looked like they just told this kid to shove a pillow inside of his shirt and just roll with it. If you look at the actor when he's not dressed up as Bruce, you can tell that he doesn't look like that, so it's obvious they put him in something. It just doesn't look natural to me. And I know that they have the ability to work really well with prosthetics and even with fat suits, because they were able to transform Emma Thompson into the Trunchbull. I just feel like it wasn't executed as well with Bruce. I also forgot how much they were really laying into this little kid during the song Bruce. Like just playing into the fact that he's a chunky kid and he had to eat this gigantic cake. But that's obviously not the fault of the movie musical, that's just the lyrics of the song. I know a lot of people were also upset upon hearing that Emma Thompson was going to be in a fat suit for this movie musical, but I personally didn't have any issues with it because they weren't really doing so to mock her weight or anything like that, which is usually what happens when fat suits are put on characters in shows and movies. Like with Monica in Friends, whenever she was wearing the fat suit, it was obvious that it was supposed to be funny and you were supposed to laugh at it. I don't think that was the case here. Really, all the prosthetics and everything on Emma Thompson was just used to make her look a little more book accurate and a little more like Pam Ferris's portrayal of Miss Trunchbull, which was just supposed to be like really muscular, and she was supposed to look really intimidating and really strong. And I think she looked incredible, and she looked exactly like what I would imagine the Trunchbull to look like. However, other than that, I think everything was great in the movie musical, and all in all, I of course loved it. The cast was very, very talented, and the songs sounded amazing. You could tell that the cast had real, genuine talent when they were singing. The movie left me with an overall good feeling. The casting was also very inclusive, even with just the background actors and such. The opening sequence where they were singing Miracle, you could see all different types of children, different types of parents, of different skin colors and ethnicities. There were a couple disabled children in there, and it's really amazing to see that in a movie, because a lot of movies and TV shows don't put in disabled actors unless the disability is a huge part of their character. Same with people of color. People don't tend to put people of color in movies unless it's significant to their stories, and I think it's really cool that this movie was able to do that. I wish I didn't have to mention it and say that this was a great thing, and I wish that this was just something that was a norm for all movies and TV shows, but it's not, and so I thought it was worth bringing up, and I think that it was really cool of them to do. You could also just see a lot of diversity within the children in the movie, and I think that was really awesome as well. I think everybody could see a little bit of themselves in some aspect in this movie. The kids they cast are also literally just some of the cutest kids I've ever seen. Like, honestly, they were all adorable. They also finally managed to keep James Corden out of a movie musical, and for that, I am very grateful. I'm surprised he didn't end up playing Mr. Wormwood. Now I want to get to the importance of the story itself. Of course, the book, movie, musical, and movie musical have the same general outline, which is this young girl named Matilda who has really shitty parents, and she starts school. She eventually realizes she has telekinetic powers, and eventually uses her telekinetic powers to, in a way, save the whole school from its terrible principal, to save her teacher from her terrible aunt, and eventually kind of save herself too. The character of Matilda herself is very important to a lot of people. She did what many people wish they could do, which was escape. Matilda was a genius who was like fully capable of taking care of herself by the age of like 2, and in the book she was 5.5 years old. She was very, very young. In the 1996 movie, I believe she was slightly aged up and she said that she was 6.5, but then in the musical and movie musical version, I believe she was intended to be around the age 5.5 as well, even though the actors playing Matilda were closer to the age of 11. Matilda is a true girl boss. She is very aware of the injustices around her and takes matters into her own hands. Whenever her mother and father do something that she doesn't think is right or fair against her, she takes matters into her own hands and gives them a little taste of discipline, which I think is a really cool concept that she is able to do that, because a lot of younger people feel powerless against injustices and a lot of people feel powerless against their parents, and so I think it was really cool to see a little kid standing up to her shitty parents. On the first day of school, it becomes very apparent just how different Matilda is from her peers. Matilda reveals the fact that she's able to multiply large sums in her head and read fully and completely, which isn't expected of 5-year-olds at all. Miss Honey is obviously awestruck and is like, oh my god, this kid is a genius. Matilda is very humble and never puts herself up onto a pedestal and acts like she's better than everybody else just because she has these abilities that they don't have, and I love that. She ends up sticking up for her classmates and rooting for them. And they also never turn against her or resent her for having more abilities than they do. The character of Matilda is not only relatable for people who have shitty home lives, but she is very relatable among neurodivergent people as well, particularly in the musical and movie musical version. Extreme sense of justice, her feeling different from her peers, her special interest in reading, and even her friendship with Miss Honey is something a lot of neurodivergent people can relate to. The song Quiet is also a very powerful ballad for neurodivergent people because it really beautifully showcases what it's like to sort of go into sensory overload and a little bit of dissociation in the lyrics. To me, she was depicted as a little more childlike in the screen versions and the musical version than she was in the book. In the book, she was definitely described as a grown-up child, and it was even said that Miss Honey could really talk to her more as an equal than as a child, and that their relationship was more of like a friendship dynamic. And even in the writing, I'm like, yeah, she doesn't really sound 5 at all. I like how in the movie and musical version, she was still sort of depicted as a child, just a really, really, really smart child. It is truly heartbreaking to read about how Matilda was literally taking care of herself at the age of 2 years old, and it's something that a lot of people have experienced in real life. Maybe they weren't fully capable of taking care of themselves at 2 years old, but a lot of people were forced to grow up too quickly, were seen as mature for their age, and forced to take care of themselves when no guardian figure did that for them. And that's another part of Matilda's story that makes it more heartbreaking and also relatable for a certain group of people. Miss Honey was also an obviously very impactful character in this story. Everyone wants a Miss Honey in their life. She's obviously a super sweet and empathetic character who genuinely loves and cares about all of the students that she encounters. One thing I was surprised to read when I reread the book was that she is literally 23 years old in the book. She was aged up slightly in all of the other depictions to be somewhere in her like 30s, but in the book she was literally 23, and that is not that much older than me. In the musicals, Miss Phelps, the librarian, did take a little interest in Matilda and cared about her. In the 1996 movie and the book, Miss Phelps wasn't really a large character at all, so Miss Honey was really the only adult figure who gave Matilda the love and attention that she craved and deserved. Immediately after finding out that Matilda was a genius, she went to talk to Miss Trunchbull to beg her to put Matilda in a more advanced class because she thought that that was what would be best for Matilda. Also took the liberty of advocating for Matilda in front of Matilda's parents, obviously eventually finding out that they suck.
Mr. Wormwood, if you think watching some rotten TV show is more important than your daughter, then maybe you shouldn't be a parent.
Jennifer Honey is a survivor of abuse herself, which we later learn is mostly because of Miss Trunchbull. She's a beautiful depiction of breaking trauma because even after everything that she went through, she still ended up being a super kind person. In the book, I really like how she was more self-critical of herself and her lifestyle because I feel like that is really relatable for a lot of people who grow up with trauma and grow up with someone telling you that you're worthless and that you can't do anything. There's one part in the book where Matilda wrote a limerick about her and called her pretty, and Miss Honey was kind of just like, that's not true, but thank you. Those were little things in the book, but I really feel like it helped build her character because after living with the Trunchbull for like 20 years, it makes sense that she wouldn't be super confident about her self-worth. The book, in my opinion, also just does a great job of conveying just what the trauma did to her and how it affected her even in her adulthood. Because a lot of people, when they hear about people living in abusive situations, the first thing that they like to say is, well, can't you just leave? Couldn't you just leave? You turned 18, couldn't you just, pack up and leave? And the harsh reality is it's not as easy as that, and Miss Honey described that beautifully. One line from the book that I really found important was, "You could have just packed up and walked away," Matilda said. "Not until I got a job," Miss Honey said. "And don't forget, it was by then dominated by my aunt to such an extent that I wouldn't have dared. You can't imagine what it's like to be completely controlled like that by a very strong personality. It turns you to jelly. So that's it. That's the sad story of my life. Now I've talked enough." In a children's book especially, I like that they were able to throw that in there to showcase that just because you're an adult doesn't mean you're free of your problem. I like that it showed that she was afraid to leave because that's realistic. I also like the fact that it said that Miss Honey lives in a small shed, but she was so happy with it because she was free, and that's where the song My House stemmed from. She was basically describing to Matilda that it wasn't a lot, but it was enough to her because she was free and she got that place herself. This is also super important, I feel like, because a lot of people don't just get away and get to live in luxury. A lot of people have to really struggle to get by for a little while, but they're still free. Sometimes people are still confined by their abusers in other ways, such as Miss Honey still working at the same place as Miss Trunchbull, and Miss Trunchbull still owning her father's house. She does, of course, get a happy ending with Matilda's help, but I think it's very realistic and important to showcase that she was still living with her demons even as a 23-year-old adult. Turning 18, hate to break it to you, but turning 18 doesn't automatically mean that your life is going to magically get better like that. Sometimes leaving isn't an option, but it also goes to show that it doesn't mean your life can't get better later on and that you aren't necessarily trapped forever. In the book, Miss Honey tells Matilda that the Trunchbull would hold her head underwater as a child, if she took a bath, and Miss Trunchbull felt as though she hadn't washed well enough. And in the 1996 movie, Miss Trunchbull says to Miss Honey, "I broke your arm once before, Jenny, I can do it again." And hearing these things makes it all the more amazing that Miss Honey was able to stand up for Matilda in the ways that she did. So afraid of the Trunchbull, but she still went to talk to her about getting Matilda placed in an older and a more advanced class. In the movie, she still accompanied Matilda to the Trunchbull's house, even though she was terrified of her. Not to mention, in all of the adaptations, it was literally implied that Miss Honey believed Miss Trunchbull murdered her father. Literal murder. And she still stood up for Matilda. And lastly, the abusers. As I said, in the new movie musical version, I feel like the Wormwoods were lacking a little bit, but all in all, I think they were a pretty accurate representation of toxicity and living with terrible people. Obviously, there's a limit to what they all did show because it is PG material for children. Matilda's parents were a lot like a lot of people. Mock her because she isn't like them and they don't understand her whatsoever. A lot of people can relate to that. And the Trunchbull was a great depiction of an abusive person in a position of authority. No one would stand up to her because she was the boss and they were terrified of her. And I think that is all realistic as well. People really are like that in real life. They thrive on power and manipulation, like her, you know, raising Miss Honey and then, you know, trying to take all of her money later on. People like that really exist and people like that really are manipulative, and I think it's an important thing to showcase. I know some scenes and some aspects are meant to be comical or upplayed for entertainment, but overall I still think some of those scenes were powerful and realistic depictions of what terrible abusive people look like. The Wormwoods and Miss Trunchbull also, all three of them were not aware of how terrible they were, and they all believed themselves to be right and just in everything they were doing, which I think is also pretty realistic. A lot of times bad people think that they're good people doing right things, and they don't see the problem with the fact that they are, you know, upsetting their daughter or their niece or destroying a whole school. Like, Miss Trunchbull is aware that they're terrified of her and are aware that, and she's aware that she's like powerful, but at the same time she thinks she's doing the right thing because she just believes children are trash. And in a lot of kids entertainment, I feel like the bad guys are just too comically bad that they don't feel realistic. But in this scenario, I feel like the bad guys were a little bit more realistic, and it makes a lot of kids and even adults be able to see them and relate to the situation and connect more with it when eventually the good guy, Matilda, Miss Honey, and all the kids are able to prevail. So all in all, I think Matilda is such a powerful story because a lot of people can relate to the trauma and the desire to be saved. A lot of people feel stuck in their story, and like Matilda, a lot of people rely on things like books or shows or media to help them get through their life. And a lot of people are still stuck dealing with their tormentors into adulthood. And if you happen to be a lucky one who hasn't been traumatized, Matilda is just genuinely a heartwarming and entertaining story. Obviously, I'm not saying you have to be traumatized to enjoy Matilda. You can just enjoy Matilda. You can just enjoy the songs because they're fun, or because they're good, or because the cast is talented. But it is still a really, really powerful thing for people who have been through shit, and it is a very important story with a lot of important representation. The movies and the Broadway cast were all incredibly talented in their ways of bringing the story to life. And Matilda is a story I've always loved, and it's very clear just why so many other people love it as well. That is going to be all for this video. I truly love Matilda and the importance behind it. I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace out.